Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Sorry, we're running a little bit tardy today. We've had some technical difficulties, and it's like 110 degrees out here, so sorry for the tardy start. Um, Thanks for joining us today. Kate Khavari is going to be discussing her brand new book, The Botanist's Guide to Society and Secrets. And I don't have a copy to hold up as I normally would. The signed copies are on their way to us right now. So I'll go ahead and put a link in the comments field should you wish to order one. And go ahead and if you have questions for Kate, go ahead and put them in the chat feature on YouTube, and I'd be happy to ask any of those questions. So Barbara, over to you.
Thank you very much. Well, the good news, bad news here is that A, I took Kate's book to London, which is why I don't have a copy, and I read it there. And B, I came home, or actually I left and came home with this awful cold. So forgive me if I sound like a frog or if I suddenly burst into whatever it is. But I have to say, I've really enjoyed this series, and it's pretty complex, Kate. You're doing several things in these books. I mean, part of it is science, part of it is a sort of early attempts for women to sort of break through the old boy glass sea and get any kind of respect for contributions to science and scholarship where they're not particularly valued. Part of it is potentially a love story. Part of it is female friendship. What am I missing? Oh, and family dynamics. Oh, yeah, right. Because family
And there's a
absolutely hates
mystery in
what
there
she's
too
doing.
somewhere.
Sorry?
There's a mystery in there too.
Thank you. Yes, indeed. There is, in order to qualify as a mystery, generally somebody has to die, which happens in this case. So am I remembering right? This is book three?
Yes, this is book 3 of the Saffron Everly mystery.
Right. And I think your covers, I'm sorry, I can't really hold mine up, but hold it really up to the screen. There we go. I think the covers are beautiful. I really love them. They sort of remind me of, Flemish flower paintings or whatever.
Yeah, they're definitely meant to be like very reminiscent of like botanical illustrations. And so for everyone, I have very, very little to do with the covers. And so
I
I
know.
have no problem being like, these are amazing because they truly are absolutely stunning. Nicole Lecht does like an amazing job every time. But each time they say, okay, like what's the botany like, for when we get ready to do cover design, like what are the botanical features of this book? So in this book, we have flowers, but we also have fungi as well.
Sorry, the minute you say fungi, you realize that, mycology, if those of you who are longtime mystery fans will know that Dorothy Sayers, who was a really often clever writer and wrote some wonderful, memorable books, the one thing she totally screwed up was mycology. And in one of her books, she kills somebody with mushroom, but she uses the wrong mushroom, which she
Oh
never.
man.
You didn't know that?
I've read some Dorothy Sayers. I love Lord Peter, but I don't think I've read that one.
Yeah.
But it's tricky because like, people think that either mushrooms are all safe or they're all poisonous. So it can be hard.
It can be hard. Now, unfortunately, one of the mushrooms that can kill you is, if I remember right, is irreversible. If you actually, ingest it, there's no like last minute rush to the ER that will save you. But anyway, so fungi in this one. The last one, I think the murder weapon was a poison bouquet. Do I recall that correctly?
Um, yes and no. There were poison bouquets that Saffron deciphers with fluorography,
Right.
but the murder weapon is disguised by them, I would say. So if you haven't read that one, I highly recommend it. I think it's great.
Well, I mean, this is only book three. I recommend that you read all three of them in order, which makes the most sense. For one thing, you will learn I mean, one of the great things about reading crime fiction is all the stuff you learn. If you have an author you can reliably feel knows her stuff and or his stuff and has done their research. I have learned more about botany. I slept through it at Stanford, so I would feel like I passed botany largely on the sort of average thing because they were all multiple choice questions. And if you guess enough, you could skate by. It wasn't that I wasn't interested. It met at a very early hour. When I was young, I had a lot of trouble getting up in the morning. But anyway, you can learn a lot. Although, do you think that this is, I mean, everything is centered here in London at is it London University?
University College London.
Okay. So what's the difference?
Um, Honestly, I'm not really sure, but I know that there's like 100 universities in London, and so they all have London and university and college like mixed up together in their names. So you could say University of London, but it's a different place than University College London, which is different than the College of London, and like
Right.
it's a whole thing.
So I'm sure you're right. Since I was just walking along down the Strand past Somerset House, is in fact University College London the adjacent property? I kind of think it is.
I'm not sure. For all that I've poured over maps of London, I don't think that it's on a river. It's the University College is on um it's right next to St. Pancras and King's Cross Station.
Oh, okay.
So I'm not
So
sure it's in the same area. But
no,
now it's like I'm gonna have to look it up and like look at my little map on my phone all the time.
no, it's not. You're right. The Strand is not the embankment, but it's down close to the river. And the reason I asked is they've done a brilliant job because they have, these long um walls and how it is in London and all, and they have put up really interesting posters for their distinguished scholars and scientists. They have a really terrific array of prize winners and novelists and all kinds of other stuff. So they have this, it's like a huge advertising board for people who've gone to the college. So I was impressed. I was just there and dodging a protest, and so
Oh
I went
man.
out, wandered along on Sunday. Um, and London is such an international city, but less so. My observation is since Brexit, a lot of stuff moved.
When I was in London last year and I went to the University College London's campus, I was so excited to like get to be there and see all the places that I had written about. And the thing that struck me, there were two things. The first was that it was the busiest place I've ever been, like just like packed to the gills. And like I've been in New York City, I've been in other like big, cities across the world, but like London was absolutely hopping. And this college campus was packed to the gills. And it was mostly foreign students. I was like, as I was walking through, there's actually a line in Society and Secrets where Saffron is realizing something about a certain character, and she realizes it because she overhears foreign languages spoken in the college campus. And like that came directly from me walking through the campus and hearing very, very little English. There was like Mandarin and French and just like languages I didn't recognize. And it was really exciting and very cool to be there to see that it was a very global university back then, unusual for the time, perhaps not for London, but having scholars from all over the world being there, and it continues to be that now. So that was cool to get to see that.
I'm so glad you got to go because after all, during COVID, we didn't get to travel there. Yeah.
Yeah, and these books came out like right as the pandemic was kind of downshifting, and so I was writing and revising them during the pandemic. So I was very happy to get to go. I'd been to London before a couple times, but it's a place that's like near and dear to my heart. I was glad I got to be there again.
I'm delighted that you were able to. So in this book, we are in 1923. So have we progressed very long? I mean, great thing about historical fiction is that you can start something right after something ends because, it's all past already. So what year was it when we first met her? Was it like 22?
It's spring of 23. So the first book takes place over like a week in the spring, and then the second book is a much longer time period. It's like 4 or 5 months from summer into fall. And now this book is the very end of fall. This is like November, late November in 1923. And I've been working on book 4, which will be in 1924.
Okay. So what you've done is you've placed it far enough away from the Great War that much of the fallout in terms of people who were injured, people who came home, people who didn't come home, people, whatever, um, is happening. And times have changed dramatically in England as a consequence of the war.
They
And
have for
so,
sure.
yeah, and so women who never had thought about working outside the home or doing things had to got their chance, many of them during the war.
Yeah.
They became nurses, they drove ambulances, they did all kinds of jobs. They didn't just stay home or necessarily go into domestic service.
And
So
it,
there's a real tension with Saffron's family here because they're very traditional and they want her to stay at home and marry well and produce a new generation and all. They're not a bit sympathetic. Her grandparents, anyway, are not a big sympathetic, are they?
yeah, they're not sympathetic. So Saffron's father was a botanist. He was the heir to a viscounty, and he decided that he wanted to like kind of play at, being a professor for a while, but he found to really love it and enjoy it. So Saffron's kind of following in his footsteps, and her grandparents were like, willing to indulge the dad. But now that Saffron is like, no, I'm actually going to stay here and like do science as my job, they are really not supportive of that. And I think it comes from that more traditional perspective, but also for the time period. By like you said, we're in 1923. Things have settled after the war.
Mhm.
We've had 5 years, give or take, for everything to settle down. And a lot of the women who went into the workforce by then had kind of been pushed back out because you
Yeah.
had this flood of men who came back needing jobs. And with that flood of men came a flood of new families because people are getting back together or getting together, and like women are having more kids, and so they are finding themselves being pushed increasingly back into that more domestic realm, which is it's further harder for Saffron because her family and society is like, well, you had your time out of the household and now it's time to go back because all the guys are back. We don't need you to do their jobs anymore.
Well, and it's not just her traditional grandparents. Her father by now has died.
Yeah.
So, and that's a problem for Saffron because she feels very much that, you know, he was a victim of the war and government. So she's not interested in supporting much of what's going on in this book. But her colleagues have the same attitude. She is really the only female in her department and has really
Yeah.
struggled to get any kind she doesn't have any financial support, so she has to, or maybe she has a little, but you
Yeah, her
know,
mom kind of sneaks her money.
that's it,
Like
right?
her pin money, she's sneaking Saffron her pin money to support her because her mom is supportive of her. She's happy that she's in London, um, following her passion. And yeah, it's hard for Saffron, in this time period. And one of the things I loved about writing this book was that I really figured out that a lot of the assumptions that I had about women in science were just like from a place of like lack of information. Um, like a lot of people are probably in the same boat as me, where like if you're like, okay, scientists of the 1800s and 1900s, they
Yeah.
can name maybe like 10. And then I'm like, of those scientists, how many of those are women? And they can maybe name one, and that's Marie Curie, right? Where, rightly so. She's an incredible scientist and did so much. But like, my assumption was that there really weren't a lot of lady scientists and that saffron really was a total novelty. But as I was researching this book in particular, because we're going into government research stations, is what they were called, government labs. and I was reading files from the lab, because the lab in this book is a real lab that actually like operated. And I was reading through their records, and I was seeing a lot of names of women, and I was very surprised. So that led me on like this big search through history, and I was really surprised to find that there really were quite a few women in the sciences being published, but they're hidden because of the way that they published. They were initials, so they're hidden behind their initials. We don't know that they're women, we just assume that they're men. So I was happy to kind of course correct in this book a little bit. We have a couple lady scientists that Saffron deals with, and then we have a young woman who is entering the university, who is, Saffron is kind of looking to her as like her past self. How can she mentor this girl and like, kind of get this full circle where Saffron sees herself now not no longer a student, like as a working scientist, and she sees women years ahead of her in terms of what they've accomplished, and she also sees this young woman coming into the academic sphere. And for me, it was fun to give that to Saffron after really having her struggle in the workplace, because it at her university, in her department, she is the only woman. Um, and so it's just, I don't know, it's nice to like give her a little bit of a break after having to deal with that for so long.
Okay, you did give her sort of a break, but on the other hand, you took away her mentor and you've
I
given her
know.
a very unsympathetic head of department, and she has to encounter him, but he's unnerving for her. He's an older man, he's, quite cold. And she was a bit spoiled by the predecessor, so that's hard. And she's been away. And so when the book opens, she's coming back, and she's really worried about the fate of some plant samples that she left behind, and stricken with terror when she can't find them. But that's sort of a bridge to reconnecting her with Alexander. I mentioned there's a potential love story here. Um, and I like Alexander. I found, and it's interesting. I don't really know the term microaggression very well, but
Mm.
it felt like that there were very often these kind of little aggressions that she reacted to quite a lot, either with her roommate Elizabeth or with Alexander and so forth. And I wonder, did you feel that way, that she should be that sensitive?
Hmm. I don't know. I think that she is realizing that a lot of things, especially in this book, a lot of things are not like what she thought they were. And so you mentioned at the beginning she's coming back into London. She was at a conference, and during this conference, she realized that, her career is maybe not going in the direction that she was hoping that it would go in. And then she comes home, and her friend is in this upheaval because her brother is coming into town and they've been estranged. And so that's going on. And then Alexander, her erstwhile love interest, is having this problem of his brother being like involved in a murder investigation. And so there's just a lot going on. And I think that she was not anticipating all of these issues stacking on top of each other. And like, I mean, honestly, she really cares for Alexander, and we get to see how that relationship changes and progresses in this book. And so I think that yeah, she is extra sensitive in this book.
Yeah,
You
I
know,
didn't remember
and
her being quite so, constantly kind of almost at war with herself, or,
mm,
with other people. And I mean, it wasn't like pyrotechnics or, flinging things over or anything, but she just seemed sort of uncomfortable a lot of the time, and that makes sense. I forgot about the spy story. I forgot. We're talking about a murder, and there's not only a murder here, but potentially a spy story. So
yeah,
this is a really complicated book.
yeah. And I think, I don't know if I can get like personal here. I wrote this book in a really like difficult time in my life.
Mm.
We had gone through some things in my family, and I started writing this book like really right when I was kind of emotionally finally ready to get out of a little depression funk. And so I always say that writing is therapy, and I put my characters through things to help me work things out. So I guess this is definitely, I can see that in there. She really is. She's going through a lot, not just because I went through a lot. There's plot reasons that she went through a lot, but I feel like she was finally getting into a rhythm, and then a lot of things started happening at once. Um,
Well, it
and
isn't just her. I mean, Elizabeth, her roommate, also has a lot going on, and
Yeah. Well, and
Alexander does.
Elizabeth is a drama queen, so
Yeah, well,
she's never gonna be the one to settle Saffron down. She's gonna be the one to be like, but like, don't you feel upset? And like, shouldn't you deal with this? And like, she's gonna play devil's advocate a little bit.
I didn't mean my remarks to be critical. What I did mean was that you really have to pay attention reading this book with, all that's going on. It all comes together, which is wonderful. Kate doesn't leave anything dangling, but I felt like I was really paying much closer attention than I often do when I'm zipping along. So I mean, I thought that was a good thing, not a bad thing, but um, it felt like they were moving in one direction and then there'd be like a blip, and then we had to resolve that. So yeah, if that reflects how life was for you, that makes perfectly good sense all the way around. And there's some really bad things happening in the background of this, because we're sort of hinting really at germ warfare or health warfare, because one of the questions that that Saffron has to keep asking is what's going on in terms of one of the farms, and what's going on with a particular strain of well, I think you give it a name, don't we eventually refer to what this thing is as plant something or other?
Um,
It has
it's,
a
I mean, it
number.
has like a specimen name, but we don't learn what exactly it is, because the particular thing, I don't want to give anything away.
Right.
It doesn't have an identity, that anyone recognizes or is willing to say, I should say.
No, it's true. But at one point, isn't there a particular seedling that has its own, like little designated number? It was so, I mean,
Yeah,
I
there's
really,
there's a
yeah,
specimen that goes missing. There's
right.
a
With an identity tag, which I kind of enjoyed. So Elizabeth is Saffron's roommate, and she too is um trying to forge an identity for herself, and she's not happy that her older brother has suddenly come to London, and her older brother may not be exactly who he represents himself to be, and Alexander has encountered him before and doesn't feel comfortable around him. So we have lots of male tension going on over there. It
Yeah,
isn't it
there's
isn't
a lot of
sexual.
testosterone.
Yeah, well, but I mean, it's not sexual tension in the same, the sense. I mean, most of it isn't anyway. Um, and we sense there's a backstory to it, which indeed it turns out to be. So I like that. You have four people and they have very complex, sibling. Two of them are siblings. The two guys have a history. The two women live together, So there's a lot going on with the main characters. And I think campus mysteries have appealed to people for generations, all the way back to like Gaudy Night by Sayers, and certainly A Secret History by Donna Tartt. So did do you like campus mysteries? Because in a way, um, that's what you're writing. And
I do like campus mysteries. I just feel like they give the like a perfect like closed network, like a closed the whole this whole thing started because I wanted to write like a really Agatha Christie style murder mystery dinner party. And when you bring people together for a dinner party, you have to have a reason that they're all together, and that reason was the university. And
Right.
so from the beginning, I was like, this university is going to provide me with endless contention and conflict and motivations and opportunities to have some really interesting murder weapons at times. So yeah, I think like a university campus is the perfect place for any story, I think, but especially a mystery because you have so many possibilities there. And like the thing that I'm contemplating for future ones is more of the like secret history of universities and hidden passages and secret societies, like really like ninth house kind of stuff, bringing that kind of more like gothic side to it in as well. There's so much there. There's technology and innovation, but there's history and tradition and mystery. So yeah, they're perfect. Campus mysteries are great.
They are great. Somebody once said that conflict is so high because the stakes are so low. Which now I mean, there over time, Tony Hillerman, who wrote, about the Navajo in the Southwest, his Edgar winning book was really, in a way, it didn't take place on campus, but it did take place among academics um, doing research. And I remember when I taught it, when I was teaching crime fiction at ASU, the kids were incredulous that the motive behind the murder in The Thief of Time was enough to make anybody kill somebody. They
Mhm.
just that's where I always remembered that, the passions are high because the stakes are so low. But no, I agree with you. It is a closed environment. I'm a big fan of campus mystery, and there are a lot of people writing them, although not really in a series. Ruth Ware wrote one recently. Ashley Winstead over here has written a couple. So I do think it's a marvelous setting for a crime novel. And there's usually fascinating stuff going on, rivalries over research
Mm.
or, over money or you know, various personal relationships that are stressed by and then there's that whole mentor-student thing, which can be you know, a relationship pattern that can be great, can lead to abuse. Um,
Mm.
you know, and students, as you say, this is probably the time in one's life when one is maybe the craziest, because you're still young enough to feel invulnerable and immortal, but at the same time, old enough to know better about some stuff.
Mhm.
So students can get up to things that are hard to imagine.
Definitely. As you're saying this, I want to like, I'm getting like so many ideas and I want to write them down for another mystery.
But you're not dealing really with students, you're dealing with faculty. And I
Yeah.
like that too, that this is they're past the student stage, they're into the professional stage, and yet in many ways they're still behaving as though they
Yeah.
were
Well, I
students.
I just feel like it's all about the ego for them, right? So
Yeah.
like, they're experts in their field, right? And that comes with like a certain level of like, I know what I'm talking about. And I don't know. I mean, we do see it a little bit in this book, but definitely it reminds me of the first book in particular. In Parties and Poisons, there's a lot of this power play
Mhm.
kind of moves between these people trying to one up each other and you know just boost their ego with every opportunity.
Well, in this particular, field, botany, there's potential for a lot of travel. And I think back to some of the great English botanical exhibitions, Mutiny on the Bounty, for example. Captain Bligh was really out there to collect the breadfruit tree. And astonishingly, after he lost his ship, he didn't lose the breadfruit trees, and they went with him in his open boat across like 2,000 miles of the Pacific and all to make it back to Kew Garden. And then there's the famous expedition up the Amazon to Manaus to steal the rubber tree pods, which eventually, came back to England and then were transplanted to English territory in Malaysia. Um, and, so the English have kind of been botanical pirates for ages. And Kew
Yes.
Garden has been one of, those places. And then you have collectors, like I think it was one of the Rothschilds who was such a plant collector. He paid for expeditions of people to go to like Nepal and bring back, rare plants and all. So some of the British gardens are astonishing, and not just local. I mean, they brought in, botanical specimens from everywhere. So there's a long, long history of Britain being involved with plants, often for commercial purposes, but sometimes just for. So, having her be a botanist really puts her at the center, I think, of, a much more global than if they were studying Chaucer or, if she were in the Shakespeare department or something.
Yeah, it definitely it makes it a little more like I hesitate to say urgent because it really doesn't feel urgent. Like when you imagine, we're gonna have botanists at a university, they're studying plants, like there doesn't feel anything urgent about that. But part of what I was reading of like in my research for Society and Secrets is that um nations are built and fall on their economy, right? And like their ability to feed their people,
Right.
or feed other people and get trade for that. Like that's the basis, right? So like at one point Saffron kind of scoffs and she's like, like who would kill over a new breed of potatoes that's like pest resistant or whatever. But then like later on, she really does realize like this could be like worth killing over. Like the research that these people are doing at this lab like really could change the world and like shift shift a nation between starvation and well-being. So I mean it really is. And botany has been a cutthroat science, kind of subtly cutthroat for that reason. Like you were mentioning, like people going all over the world and to find rare plants, sure, for like the glory of it, but like I mean the root of it is we want to find the best things to bolster our country's ability to provide, really.
Well, on two levels. One, to feed the country, and two, to make more money. I mean, let's remember that the voyages of the Portuguese and on, the Dutch and then the British in part were, they were going out in quest of spices.
Yeah.
And the reason the spices were so popular is that, they didn't have good food preservation techniques and, whatever. And so in part, the spices were there to disguise how bad the food was or to perk it up. And this is true of fashion too. Think about that, Kate, that I remember my husband and I sailed down the Columbia. We were on a Columbia River trip, which I love. And we got to Astoria. And Rob said to me, "Why do they call it Astoria?" And I said, "Hello, Rob." I said, possibly because the Astors were constantly in quest of beaver, because, beaver hats were such a fashion thing. And then, there was the whole thing about ostriches when ostrich feathers, for women were such a big deal. Or think about the
Mm.
silkworm. So, there have been expeditions and danger and murder and all this other stuff over not just food, but over fashion, whatever it is that people wanted. They went after whales in part because before plastic, they had to have something flexible for corsets, and whalebone was what they
Mhm.
used. So I mean, really, if you think about it, the world sort of turns in part on just on economics.
Oh, definitely, definitely.
So you illustrate that very well in this book. So Alexander and Saffron, do you envision some sort of life for them together? You're not committing yourself, but um, I wondered if you were going to make Saffron a kind of forever spinster, or whether you thought that was going to be um, too lonely a life for her.
I would say that Um, I have an interest in going against type when it comes to saffron. Like, yeah, she's kind of she has that like stereotypical nerd thing of like, she's very single-minded on like the thing that she loves, and she loves plants and solving murders using plant skills. But
Right.
like, she likes going out dancing, and she has friends, and she has romantic relationships. So I want to give Saffron as full a life as possible. And we'll see who that ends up being with. But
I lost your sound.
still, or is it back?
What happened? Did I do that?
I don't know. I
No.
can hear you.
Did you click your sound? Oh, it's my internet. Keep talking.
Okay.
Sorry.
um,
It's the heat. All of a sudden, you just sort of disappeared. I did feel like, obviously Elizabeth has a pretty brisk sex life. Um, Good for her. And so I was wondering, just what was the state of contraception in 1923? Because they seem to be, reasonably forthright.
as far as I know, it was actually in pretty decent shape. Marie Stopes and her devices were available, and they probably weren't very easy to get, but they were available and they existed. And so, as far as I know, if you wanted to have a more carefree time with someone, then it was possible to do it with pretty good confidence that you wouldn't end up regretting it.
Uh-huh. Well, it would be a definite impediment to, Saffron or Elizabeth if they suddenly became pregnant in the middle of all this. So I was just curious
Yeah.
because, you're very discreet. There's no actual sex or violence on the page, but I did have a strong sense that there was certainly some closed door activity going on. And I thought, yay, good for them. All right. So, you've done three books, and I'm sure to hear that you're thinking about writing a fourth. What is your background before this?
I was a teacher. I taught pre-K and fifth grade. And then when I got pregnant with my son, I had always planned on staying home. And by then I had written uh, four and a half of these saffron books just kind of on a whim, saying, I was like, could I write a mystery? Let's see what happens. And I wrote like four in 4 months. And so I know it was really like opening, a fire hydrant, and then all these stories just came out. And they were not very good to start with because I didn't know what I was doing. But when I stayed at home with my son, I was like, this is my chance to do something with these and see if I can get them into shape and query and see if I can find an agent and a publisher and everything. So yeah, I was a teacher, but I think really the the reason why I ended up writing about this particular subject in this time period is because part of what I taught was US history, and I would push try to get through as much as I could through this school year to get to World War One, because I feel
Mhm.
like World War One, it's, I don't know, it's weird for me to say this now, like thinking back before I taught it, because I've never been interested in history as like a subject in school, but teaching it really changed my perspective on it. And I had so much fun teaching history that like when it came time to write this book, like what popped into my head was um, a direct result of the First World War, because botany, to a lesser extent, but science was transformed by the First World War. And that was one of the things that we talked about with my class was, what are five things that the world changed because of this, and technology and science was one of them for sure.
Absolutely. So is medicine. Plastic surgery owes much of its origin to surgeons trying to help men wounded in the war, particularly snipers, where the guns would,
Mm,
give them terrible facial wounds. And they in the Civil War they fashioned masks for them. They had like masks made of metal or something to try to cover up these awful scars.
yeah.
So,
And they continue to do that, is my understanding. They continue to do that after World War One as well. There's a nonfiction book that came out a little while ago called The Facemaker.
that's right.
And that, I don't know if it was just World War One, but it certainly covers World War One in the, facial disfigurement, how they dealt with that, and the things that they learned about plastic surgery, but also these masks that they would wear.
Well, those were the most visible injuries, but there was a long history of amputee. I mean, medicine, for all that, a lot of it arises out of battlefield medicine, making pushes. So, over the horizon for you in your time period is the advent of penicillin, for example. So there are pharmaceuticals that I think the first use of aspirin is right about the time you're writing, isn't it? Like 1922, 23 isn't when aspirin sort of showed up?
Aspirin. I'm
I'm
trying
pretty
to
sure it
think.
is. And so I think that's another direction. I mean, certainly you could talk about it in another book. It's not just feeding people, but plants as medicine. Um, and
Oh
the
yeah.
old English
Oh yeah.
herbals had some really remarkable information. Even now, I think that we're regaining some respect, having gone through such a technological advances in medicine and pharmaceuticals, but now we're recognizing that, there was a value in some of the old plant-based stuff that we might bring back.
Absolutely. That was one of the things that I really learned so much about when I was writing Flowers in Fatality, because Saffron is working closely with a doctor in that book. So I was learning a lot about all the things that plants can do. And I was just telling this to a friend of mine the other day when we were talking about the books and how writing was going and everything. He was telling me about some things that he had learned about traditional folk medicine. And he was, we were both kind of like, it's amazing that like literally every plant is a remedy and a poison. It just depends on how much of it you're taking and for like what reason.
That's very true. And also recently, some of them have been recognized again for their cosmetic attributions. For example, my daughter who was looking into this discovered on Instagram or whatever that's worth. But it seems to be true that if you make a rinse using rosemary and I think mint or something, it's very good for your hair.
Yeah.
And so instead of buying all these, artificial cosmetic products, there's a sort of a wave towards, natural products for for beauty and cosmetics and so forth and health. So
Well, that
there's
reminds me of what you were saying about aspirin. I did look it up, by the way. I couldn't help
oh
it.
good.
It was Bayer uh, in 1899 finally like put aspirin on the market. And aspirin actually comes from the salicylic acid in willow bark.
Right.
So like willow bark tea, if you read Regency romance like I do,
Right. That's what they do.
that's what you do when you get a fever. You have willow bark tea. And so yeah, it's interesting you're saying some people are like returning back to these more like traditional, like more folk remedies when like almost all of our medicine, I mean it's made in a laboratory, but like almost all of it comes from learning about plants, and they've distilled it down and taken certain things to like just put it into a pill instead of like drinking the tea or using the rosemary oil or whatever.
Right. I mean, one of the great stomach remedies currently everybody is advocating is lemon, ginger, and cinnamon, and possibly cloves, a cinnamon stick. And if you're having digestive things, instead of taking Tums, you brew up water, lemon, ginger, which is a
Ginger.
marvelous plant, and throw in a few cloves and stir it up with a cinnamon stick and whatever, and that's supposed to be so good for you. So I find it all fascinating, but I guess the point I was making is you're never going to run out of things to write about. You don't have to, they don't all have to be poisonous. I mean, although do you feel like your series demands that all the murders be done somehow or other by plants, plant poison or plant product?
Um, yes and no. I definitely feel like there has to be like some kind of like botanical element to it. But I've thought about it. I'm like, I have to at some point I'm gonna run out of ways that I understand how to use, this certain element or whatever. But yeah, I guess somebody could like, shoot somebody over a plant and that would work too. But yeah, I
Sure.
definitely feel like there needs to be like an element of like at the very least plants, if not poisons.
No, I understand that, but I don't know that poison always has to be, your go-to. Be kind of interesting to see. Well, I really enjoyed your books, and I think we should call Patrick up to see if we have any questions from the audience. Again, the good news is there's a fourth one on its way.
And I
Yes.
was able to get us connected to Facebook
Oh, good.
Oh, great.
right at the beginning, so they didn't really miss much. But we'll post the entire conversation afterwards. Yeah, there's some people, and I'm sorry everybody watching. I got into the weeds talking about the merits of Sprouts versus Whole Foods. I don't know how we got off on that, but
Oh, I don't either.
it's the people's Whole Foods is the way I look at it.
Okay.
Let's see. Renee would like to know, Kate, what type of books do you enjoy reading, and what are you currently reading?
Oh, we can look. I have my books here, but this is my trophy shelf behind me of all my favorite books. I try to only buy books that I reread, because I'm a big rereader, and so I'm always rereading my favorites. But I love mysteries, obviously. I love historicals, whether they're mystery or romance. I'm a big romance reader. That's why all of my books, including Saffron Everly Mysteries, have romantic subplots. I just can't help myself. And I also just love fantasy. I'm a huge fantasy reader. I find that a lot of lovers of historicals are also big fantasy people because it's the world building, right? For me anyway, it's the world building. I love to be in a different place with different rules and different structures to society than what we have now. So those are like my top things. And I'm reading what is actually like a historical fantasy adventure, which is the adventures of Amina al Sarafi
Akhtar.
or Sarafi. I'm not sure which one
Oh,
it is, but I think it came out last year, and it is like a middle-aged lady pirate going on an adventure, and it is just amazing. It's in this amazing like rendition of like historical Arabian Peninsula, I think. And it's just really cool. There's so much mythology in it. There's a lot about Islamic culture in it, and it's like an adventure book about pirates. So I'm listening to it on audiobook. If anybody's an audiobook person, it's excellent on audiobook.
Sounds like a little something for everybody in that book.
Yeah, there's a lot. Like I could recommend it to like anybody, I feel like, and they would enjoy it.
I found it here for you. It's called The Adventures of Amina al-Sirafi by
Sarah.
Chakraborty, who actually John of our staff, John Charles, is a big Chakraborty fan, and I think Pat King is too. We
PK,
carry it in the
definitely.
store for sure. So
Right.
if you're looking for she's done three earlier books you might not know that were based on metals. So I think one of them is about silver and brass, maybe gold, but
The
anyways,
the first one is City of Brass.
yeah,
But I'm not sure what the other two are called. But you're right, they're all metals.
yeah.
And another recommendation for people who love historicals in particular, I just finished this the night before last. I stayed up way too late reading it. It's called Marvelous.
Hmm.
Um, and it's so cool. It's such a cool book. It really like hurt my heart though. So if you're looking for a lighthearted read, this is not it. It's like an imagining of the life of the man considered to be the inspiration for Sleeping Beauty, or not Sleeping Beauty, Beauty and the Beast. So he was like an oddity that was collected to live in the French court because he was covered in hair. And so it's about his life and the woman that he was arranged to marry and like their children. And it's like just beautiful and strange. And it was a wow. It was a wow book for me.
Let's see. Okay, Ella would like to know, other than book 4, are you working on any other different projects?
So many projects. I am one of the types of authors that I never run out of ideas. I run out of time. So I have a historical fantasy of my own that I've been working on, which is actually a retelling of Sleeping Beauty, that is set in like an ancient Greek inspired world with ancient Greek monsters and a really cool magic system. And I finished a revision of that and I sent it off to my agent. So hopefully, sooner rather than later, it will be on your bookshelves. And of course, I am working on the next Saffron book.
Are they the kind of the equivalent of the Seven Dwarfs in your retelling?
No, no, that's Snow White. Snow
Is that
White has
Snow White?
dwarves.
Oh, of
Yeah,
course.
this one doesn't have dwarves. It only has monsters.
No.
Only monsters, right?
Got my characters mixed up. Um, let's see. Do you feel a movie or a TV show is more likely for Saffron?
I think, I mean, if I could choose, I would choose a TV show because like I want more of it rather than less. But like I feel like, the wonderful things about books, and we see this like especially like with Bridgerton right now, is that if you want to, you can really expand on the different subplots. So I feel like this book definitely I could see as a TV show because we do have a little bit meatier plots going on. It would be great as a TV show. It would be great as a TV show universe.
Yeah. Historicals cost more, so
They
so that's
do.
a slight dampener there, but hopefully, I think they'd make very interesting TV. And the British, fortunately, have hung on to many historical artifacts that make it easier for them. They still have the buildings. And they seem to have kept trains and cars and clothing and stuff, if you're paying any attention to the vast amount of British television. So
Yeah.
maybe
And
so.
there's plenty of TV that has been made about the 1920s.
Right.
So, they have a wardrobe from Downton Abbey somewhere waiting.
Yay.
No more questions that I see, although Jillian shares your enthusiasm for that book, Marvelous.
Oh
I
yeah.
too. I've read it myself and I thought it was amazing. So yes, there's so many good books to read. It's a gift. But it's also in a way a challenge because trying to get your way to the books that you will like the most is not that easy. This week alone, according to my Monday information officer, there are 1,900 and some new books published this week, just this week. And
Just
so trying to keep up, or thread your way through it, is very difficult. And that's one reason we do so many events, because that's one way we can highlight books that we think are interesting and worth your time reading.
yeah.
It's you have to make choices. You can't possibly cover anything like that much material. So
Exactly. And
and
that's
if
why
you
I
have
never feel bad about not finishing a book. I don't feel bad about putting it down and picking up something else because life's too short to read a book that you're not enjoying.
Absolutely true. And it's helpful, for us as a bookstore to have diverse staff who have different reading tastes. I'm happy to tell you, Patrick, that our about to be hire in July has sent me 2 new book reviews. So she's going to be, I think, really interesting to have, among other things, as a reviewer. I love it.
Right?
Yeah, it's really good. So, Kate, thank you very much for your time. Can you hold up your book again so we can give it one more push? It really is a beautiful book, and they all are beautiful books. So I recommend A Botanist's Guide for Society and Secrets, but I really think you ought to go back and read the first 2. It's not that the mystery is not complete, but the arc of the characters does evolve as you read along. And so, you know, it's kind of better to start at the beginning if you can. That's harder for us to say at book 12, you know, but we could do it at book 3. So
Yeah.
thanks very much, Kate, and good night, everybody. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you all so much. I loved having our chat.
Well, maybe you can come and see us in person next time. I'll see what I can do about that.
Maybe when it's not 114 degrees.
Well, that's true. A lot depends on your publication month. We'll figure it out. Anyway, it would be lovely.